Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this air-conditioned room. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from one of our faculty at Oxford University, and this gives me the chance to tell you my favorite Oxford joke. How many Oxford professors does it take to change a light bulb? Change? That's the only Oxford joke I know. The reason I tell it is because the Oxford Internet Institute is one of the most interesting centers at the university. It started about 15 years ago, and it's about a third humanists, and a third social scientists, and a third computer scientists. And our computer scientists have to learn the theory stuff, and our theorists have to learn to appreciate at least the craft of code. And so it makes us, as a group of scholars, a particularly powerful community for studying new phenomena, especially those like AI. And so tonight we have one of our community, Dr. Gina Neff, to speak about gender. Does AI have gender? Let me begin first with a thank you to our host. Pinsent Masons has kindly contributed the room and the refreshments for after the talk. I'd like to say a specific thank you to Alexis Durat St. James, one of our board members who's helped arrange tonight's evening, Toby Koppel and Richard Suskind, who've helped make the event, have helped place the event here at Pinsent Masons. We'll be using the hashtag OIILondon if you want to hashtag. I've never seen a professor tweet from the podium, but if you have questions, it's conceivable that this faculty member might be able to respond to you and over Twitter. So do use OIILondon if you want to carry on a virtual conversation. Now, what can I say about Gina? She's got several books under her belt. Her first was Venture Labor. It was an ethnography of New York's Silicon Alley, an extended period of immersion with a group of people who designed many of the technologies we now live with. Her second book, also from MIT Press, was an ethnography of the quantified self movement. These people, many of whom are in the audience, I suspect, who use new technology in a very integrated way with their life and find themselves negotiating this awkward balance between the data we generate as citizens and the political economy of technology design that captures our data and does things with it that we don't fully appreciate, fully understand, or fully sanction. So, without more, let me introduce Professor Neff to take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to see so many people inside on such a lovely summer's evening. I'm deeply honored that you're here. So I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm here tonight to bring a critical lens to a particularly hot emerging question. Some of the research that I do is empirically grounded, but it's very hard to ask questions about what the new technology is emerging. You can't really do a survey of people saying, how do you think this technology that isn't here yet, isn't fully deployed, will affect your life? You can do a survey, but you might not get meaningful results. And so part of what I've done in these three very different studies funded by industry and the National Science Foundation in the United States is to try to think about emergence from a deeply sociological place, and to try to think about how our current and existing social practices and norms and beliefs will shape the different futures for a technology. It's sort of a sociological futures, but something that's rooted in research rather than in future design. And that's what I'm here to do tonight. So the question at hand is, does AI have gender? And my answers are something I hope none of the students in the audience actually do on their exams, because I'm going to give three answers. And as everyone knows, you can't really do that on an exam. Yes, no, and I hope so. I hope you all are more fair to me than I would be if I were a marker of these said essays. And by gender, what I want to talk about are the ways in which societies define what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be trans, bi. The way in which we come to have certain expectations, very culturally embedded, for what kinds of behaviors are normal and acceptable, and how we define what is masculine and what is feminine. So this is what I mean by gender. And through the process of AI, I want to take you through where we are in today's society and think about what might be coming. And I hope to leave us on a hopeful note. Let me start with some definitions, and these definitions help build the case for no, AI is not gendered. So in Meredith Broussard's new book, Artificial Unintelligence, she quotes a pioneer in artificial intelligence giving a very clear definition of what is machine learning. What is it that we have when we're talking about large-scale algorithms? And we say it's very specific. We have a very specific task, a very specific kind of measurement of that performance of that task in a very unique experience or environment. And I want to launch with this definition of what machine learning is from Tom Mitchell in order to say that there's something very specific when we talk about machine learning. Now, machine learning has had a flourishing of developments, both technological and social, that allow us to kind of imagine something called AI. And I think this is an interesting split. Here I bring in a definition from Yann LeCun, who's the head of AI at Facebook. And in this article in Nature, he says that what deep learning has allowed in machine learning, what it is allowing the artificial intelligence community of developers, technologists, scholars, it's allowing these major advancements in solving problems that have been really, really hard to solve. The joke is, in computer science, an easy problem, it can take hours. A problem that to an outsider seems similarly easy, it can take years. So we seem to have this idea that I make tonight that when we look at the basic definitions of what is artificial intelligence, we have something that's here today. People in the field are calling it narrow AI. What are the scopes of the kinds of problems that can be solved with the computational advances and enormous amount of data that we're putting onto these problems? Narrow AI looks like narrowly defined tasks. They have a very particular purpose, and it takes lots of costly training and labeling of the data in order to make a functioning system. This is where we are in the state of artificial intelligence today. The hope is that soon we'll be able to take certain trained algorithms and have them be able to explain in human terms why they work and what they're doing. That is, in some cases, we can't simply today understand why particular models work and function and why others don't. As a sociologist, this is one of the problems that I think is really important, and it's something I'll come back to tonight. From a business perspective, having large amounts of data and large amounts of effort and energy, time and money spent on training very specific models doesn't help us further the case that data will solve all problems. Right now, we need to build towards multitask, multi-domain kinds of machine learning in order to make the application of the work to multiple domains. In the words of LeCun, though, when we talk about general artificial intelligence, and perhaps something that we think of from science fiction or Hollywood, he says we're not even close to a rat in terms of how machines are thinking. So as the public, we might have these imaginations of what artificial intelligence are, but the idea of what the algorithms can do today are really very limited. However, these are goals. They're goals that are motivating investment in industry, and they're goals that are motivating the ways in which people are working. So some people want to get to very broad general AI, even though we're not there yet. So if we were to personify infrastructure, we might picture some of the people that I've talked about today. But we certainly wouldn't give it gender. We wouldn't say a server room, a co-location facility has gender. We wouldn't say server racks are male or female. And yet, from major stock photography and stock illustration companies, we see how artificial intelligence and AI gets imagined. It's embodied, it has a body, and very commonly that body is female. So when we think about the general imagination of what artificial intelligence is, one of the answers is AI has gender. Now, I took these from a major company. These are popular, some of the most popular searches for images of AI. And they really annoy people in the machine learning community. They want us to stop showing robots when we talk about computer models. And so why are we doing it? Why is it that when we display and distribute information about artificial intelligence, whether it's a newspaper editor or a Hollywood movie, we've shown it with something that has a body, has a voice. And this is going to be part of my argument of how we humanize those actors and agents in our social and technological systems and how they act upon us. I mean, this is somebody's image of what online support looks like. It's not mine. And we might laugh. I actually did this for the cheap laugh. It didn't work. We might laugh, but these representations have real impact. I'll leave this on the screen, as challenging as it is, to remind you that voice assistant, virtual assistants are often coded as female. In fact, a major study of how virtual assistants are coded, when they are in Maxis found that when they are in law or finance, the virtual assistants that are used are coded as male. Bring them into the home, into the domestic space, and we are given with female voices. Now, that alone isn't necessarily enough I think, for us to worry about. But are we building systems that represent authority as masculine and assistance and subservience as female? 77 characters representing artificial intelligence in the movies from Metropolis, Fritz Lang's 1927 masterpiece, to Alex Garland's 2015 Ex Machina. 77 AI characters, only 3 did not have gender. If we show AI in a film, we need to code it. Is it male? Is it female? Guess which ones the sexy ones are. That was also a cheap laugh. These representations matter. Live Person did a survey of 1,000 American consumers, and they asked them, name a female leader in technology. 8% of American consumers said they could do it. Only 4% actually did. A quarter of that 8%, they said Alexa or Siri. This is what a female leader looks like to American public. Sadly, I speak of my country people. However, they then asked for a male leader in technology, and half could do that. Half. Bill, Mark, Elon, Steve. Sorry, Jeff is not on this list at all. So when we're thinking about who is leading technology, I'm not the only one to notice these questions of the people building systems are lacking in voices from half of humanity. This is the CEO, Robert LoCascio of Live Person. Just this week, he wrote an opinion piece that refers back to the study that his company commissioned. And he launches this piece by talking about his 2-year-old toddler daughter who's barking orders rudely at Alexa, offering a modeling of the kinds of behavior that he wouldn't want to see and yet feels powerless to do. And so I'm not the only person noticing that if we want to build future technologies that actually speak to broader publics, we might need to work on our representation problem. Another leader in virtual assistants, Dennis Mortensen from XAI, says that we've actually built a bit of a problem because we've tried to humanize our technologies. He raises this point. Now, let's be fair. He's solving problems. In his case, virtual assistants, Amy or Andrew Ingram, that allow the users to choose the gender. In this particular case, the company has said that women tend to choose Andrew and men tend to choose Amy. But in making that choice of humanizing and domesticizing a technology into our everyday lives, we're inadvertently, perhaps, reproducing and recreating some of the stereotypical behavior that we wouldn't want to see in future societies. Laurie Penny, the feminist columnist at the New Statesman, has said that the way we treat our technology has been a reflection of how we actually secretly really want to treat women. She notes that many of the companies bringing out virtual assistants in the homes secretly and off the record say how much they have to work around the questions of harassment that people are layering on to these gendered voices. She says, we really don't want to consider women's feelings in addition to those of robots, of female robots. Which brings us to Tay. So some of you may remember Tay. Tay was a Microsoft chatbot. She was based on the wildly successful and popular Xiao Ice, which is still in use on Chinese social media. She lasted about 24 hours on Twitter until she began spewing invective, obscenities, misogyny, fascist tweets, and became a public relations nightmare. Now, who is responsible for Tay's terrible behavior? Is it the company? Is it the platform? Is it society? Microsoft could have solved the problem. Any woman with a public voice knows that today's Twitter is not a safe place for women to have an opinion and a voice. They could have listened to women about what Twitter's actually like. And I think they did. It's a huge learning opportunity. And for those of you who haven't followed up with Tay's sister, Zoe, she functions much more like the Chinese social media virtual agents, in which she communicates in direct messages, not publicly. So why do these representations matter? Well, they matter because women aren't sitting at the table in the design where these technologies are being designed. In fact, we're going backwards. In 1984, 37% of US graduates were computer science majors. But in 2014, only 18% were. We're literally going backwards. At the largest AI conference, NIPS, 8,000 attendees, 17% women. These are problems that we need to work on if we want to increase the creative and innovative ability of the teams designing technologies. So yes, AI is deeply gendered because our society is, because the teams making these technologies are. Daniela Rosner, in her new book, her fabulous new book, Critical Fabulations, makes a call for us to reconsider feminist notions of design. Well-trained as design, having worked as a designer, thinking deeply in the communities of computer-human interaction, she says, design has these principles of individualism and universalism and objectivism and solutionism, and she wants to write this alternative history that brings back some of the stories that got lost along the way. Why are those the values that we think of as inherent when we design new technologies? A feminist theory might take on different kinds of ideas, things that are not about an individual, that might be about collectives, things that are not about universals, but are about particulars, things that are not just about one objective scientific truth, but recognizing that people have different experiences and might bring that to bear on the problem. And finally, instead of a God's eye view looking down to solve a problem, maybe we need a little bit more ground up, seeking out expertise and advice. I have a plant in this picture because I want to take a brief detour to tell the story that Broussard tells in Artificial Unintelligence about the great artificial intelligence founder, Marvin Minsky. So in an obit for Minsky, the Oxfordian, Stephen Wolfram, physicist, mathematician, also pioneer in artificial intelligence, he tells what he thinks is a charming story. He's staying in Minsky's daughter's apartment in Boston. And he notices the houseplants have these bugs on them. And he calls up Minsky and says, what should I do? There's black dots on the houseplants, and it looks like there's little bugs around them. And this is the charming bit of the obituary. He says, well, we could build nanobots. That's right. This is the 1980s. He's like, we could build little nanobots, and they could take care of the bugs, and we could do it this way. And Wolfram says, that's fine, that's fine. No, literally, what should I do about your daughter's plants? I don't want them to die while I'm here. You know where this punchline is going? Let me ask my wife. Because you see, in this story, which is supposed to tell kind of the crazy scientist too busy to care, the creative genius who's designing nanobots to deal with mealybugs, it's the wives and the daughters who know that a dash of washing up liquid in a squirt bottle of water is how you've gotten rid of these aphids for generations on houseplants. And so what seems like a story about how we could automate everything in Wolfram's own terms, how we could design technology to take care of every problem in his own stated goal about what AI can do, becomes a story really of, really? You want to go through that effort for something that at least half of humanity knows? As Broussard sums up the state of affairs in artificial intelligence design, she says, let me get this straight. We have a small group of elite men who have tended to overestimate their mathematical abilities, who have systematically excluded women and people of color in favor of machines for centuries, who have tended to want to make science fiction real, who have little regard for social convention, who don't believe social norms or rules apply to them, who have unused piles of government money sitting around, who have adopted the rhetoric of far-right libertarian anarcho-capitalists. What could possibly go wrong? Her punchline, not mine. But this is the social infrastructure that we have for artificial intelligence. This is the environment in which artificial intelligence is emerging. And this is, I think, one of the problems that we need to be working on. And in fact, many people are working on these questions of bias and representation in artificial intelligence design. And many people are starting to work on questions of fairness, I knew that would happen, of fairness, accountability, and transparency in machine learning. For example, let's take OII alumni and MIT Media Lab student Joy Bualami with her paper with Timo Gubru on the Gender Shades project that she did for her Media Lab master's thesis. She noticed that major facial recognition software, Face++, IBM Watson, and Microsoft's cognitive services misgendered people at different rates. So these systems all worked reasonably well at telling the gender of light-skinned men. However, the error rates for women with dark skin ranged from 20 to 34%. 34%. Literally, 1 in 3 women not being able to be recognized on facial recognition software. Now, we can debate whether better facial recognition software is something that we want for our communities. And yet, it shows that we're having an extreme problem in thinking about where training data come from and how it's being implemented. There are many people working on questions of the potential harms from algorithmic decision making. These harms are both individual and collective. These groups include groups like Data and Society and AI Now, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is fighting for the rights for scholars and activists and others to be able to audit algorithms without fear of persecution from Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And so we need to be thinking about these questions of bias that we're building. So yes, in this case, AI is gendered. But I want to talk about when AI becomes social infrastructure, and here's where I want to take a slightly different approach than what some of my predecessors have done. Because you see, we're building social and technical infrastructure that will be rolled out into existing organizations, companies, governments, and we need, I would argue, to be paying very close attention to how AI becomes an actor in those organizational settings. And this is a line of questioning that's become, there's less attention that's been paid to this line of questioning in scholarly work. So I would call our attention to implementation in the wild. What will happen with AI? Will it undermine the judgment and voice of people around it, particularly those of women in organizational settings? And these stories are not hard to imagine. In Virginia Eubank's brilliant new book, Automating Inequality, she talks about how an older system, a system designed by IBM, is rolled out in child protective services in the state of Indiana. And the state runs out of money, there's a big contractual dispute. The political economy of how the system gets designed matters. But on the ground, there are individual caseworkers deciding whether children should stay with their families or not. And Eubanks notices that at least there are these skilled caseworkers in these systems who have the benefit of years of judgment and years of work to be able to question and push back on the systems. And when there's a strong caseworker, when there is a caseworker who is seen as having authority, then the system, when it is wrong, can be challenged. When it's not, time and again in this book, she points out to the places where, in organizational settings, people without power have a hard time pushing back. So this is hard work to do, and I should know because I actually did it wrong myself. So I had my last large grant from the National Science Foundation literally has these words in the title, that engineers, in our case we were looking at high-end energy engineers in large-scale construction, that they have answers to problems, and if we can only work on some of the communication and organizational principles, we can help them translate that data into team settings. The teams are the ones who are going to synthesize. This is the framing that I used to win the grant, and I was wrong. These are some of the earlier models. These are building information models, by the way, and this is a building information modeling team. But it was this data that we built on energy, our energy work, because it actually looked much more like this. So in the front, we see one of the energy engineers that we shadowed for 3 years. And they're trying to decide which model to build. Now, these models are not algorithmic models. They're not super complex. They're computationally, they are detailed. So 40,000 pages of code developed by the US Department of Energy. This is to predict future energy use for very large-scale hospitals, and I can't expect you to read this off the slide, but the 3 cases that they're looking at range from an energy savings of $245,000 US a year to $515,000 US a year. That's for one hospital. So this is, this is a lot of money, $500,000 just per year. So that's the kind of scope and scale of how big these systems are. And he's meeting with a group of facility managers, literally the people who make rooms like this seem comfortable on nights like tonight. People who are responsible for making sure that the lights are on and the air conditioning actually works. And what our energy engineer is doing here is before he even begins to build the kind of model, he needs to know the parameters. He needs to know the scope of work. And that involves a lot of design work. They're literally having a design charrette. Are we going to build model A? Are we going to build model B? Are we going to build model C? And it was this kind of work that inspired us for thinking about how, if it only takes 3 months to build one of these models, how is the actual modeling going in companies where it takes much longer to build those kinds of systems? What kind of system do we want, and how are we going to frame it and scope it? That these fundamentally are questions of design, not simply questions of building data and deploying it. And that leads us to the kinds of people we saw working in this field. So we found that the data became an input for the conversations that teams had, and that they never simply took the models they were building as a given, but rather they needed to have some kind of interaction around them. And guess what? On the left-hand side, we see a student team, and we see more women and more representation in the teams where they're having this kind of interactive sense-making work. And so the skills for sense-making become incredibly important when we recognize that what we're building are not final solutionism systems, but rather systems that begin as starting points for conversations. This is what they look like deployed. I love this picture. This is a picture from one of our field sites. This is a very large laboratory building on an unnamed campus in an unnamed city in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Because at the start of our field work, everyone said, you know, well, we're the engineers, we're going to have the data, we're the ones building the models, and those hard hats. And they said it with derision. And that's when my ethnographic antenna sort of poked up, and I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, oh, they don't know anything. Those guys, they just wear hard hats. They don't know anything. And so in the beginning design work of these models that were helping to potentially save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, potentially helping to increase the efficiency of the construction process, make better, greener buildings, the end user was really thought of with a kind of disgust. Those silly people, they don't really know how to use our technology. I was reminded of the classic communication book, Carolyn Marvin's When Old Technologies Were New, in which series of jokes were told by engineers about those silly users. Oh, those silly women, they don't really know how to use the telephone. You know what they want to do? They want to use it for social. Ha, ha, ha. It's a business tool. And it seems like a laughable construct to us today because the killer app for the telephone, of course, is social. What are we missing now by not integrating these kinds of perspectives? The perspectives of users who use technologies differently or have a different way of knowing, by not integrating their perspectives into the tools we're designing today. But more importantly, who will have the power to question and provide feedback and response when good AI goes bad, when we can't understand whether an answer fits with the local context or whether it's something that is giving us a new and novel insight. And who will that person be? I would argue that much of what we will be looking at in the future is these kinds of implementations where that fuzzy line between the interface of the end user and the system will provide these different kinds of opportunities, hopefully for questioning and power. But if not, then for negative consequences that I fear could be catastrophic for women. So here's what I think we must do. We absolutely need to be working on increasing representation and diversity in technology. And we must be thinking about increasing the diversity in training data so that we're representing many different kinds of people in the systems that we're building. We have to ensure that these systems preserve voice and judgment for people who are the end users. And we need to make sure that they're designed to get feedback and response from end users into those. We need to design for use We need to plan for that misuse or alternate use. And we certainly need to work to prevent abuse. And of course, I think we need to be increasing transparency and accountability for implementation. This is where I'm hopeful. I think that we can begin to have and build better organizations and workplaces and systems of governance if we think about our technology as coming from the kinds of social infrastructure that we have now and working with those realities. I think we'll be better off if we start to work with the social realities and infrastructures of those very organizations. Rather than design for a utopian future, general AI, we should be thinking about what kinds of knowledges and what kinds of people do we want to empower with the tools that are being designed. With that, I want to give a bit of a shout out to many of the people who have helped me think these thoughts. There's also, there's some fabulous new books out on the topic. There's also, we have tonight in our midst the author of a great new book, John Cheney-Lippold is here, the author of We Are Data. And some of our master's students will want to make a beeline for you, hopefully, in our reception time so that they can have a chance to chat with you about the book we read this year. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention on this lovely summer afternoon.